The following step will help you focus on this critical issue and give you better, give there is better be confidence, possible organizational models following, as well as there's also difference to ability. The word is here, the command control strategy. The following main interview with the people inevitably have their own agenda. If you are too authoritarian, the daily word then you're going something with the more to the going over regular natural selfishness and really predominant. You have to create a community which have a development controlled by your influence, their following it. With the right people we pray, people who will enact the spirit of your ideas without being intimidated. Make a community poor and inspiring, focus and attention on the team politics. Make a sense of participation, but do not fall into thinking the irrationality of the collective vision of people. Represent look like a fairly fair net whenever we negotiate with the commander. World War I began in August 1914. By the end of that year, all of the working from the British replaced the climate being solving what the Germans. Meanwhile, though, on the Eastern Front, the Germans were abandoning the Russians, allied with the British and France. And British leadership had to try to use that and point that first over that and around some church or another place to into the second on the peninsula and Turkey Ferdinand Schultz. Turkey was an early German and the Berlin was legitimately confused. The Turkish capital, present day Istanbul, and the Allies could take relief with. After level were following heavy road hand to the Union. In addition, using this Turkey and the Balkans, the Allies could attack Germany from the southeast, and dividing its army the region was a building the bottom of the concern. They would also have a clear supply line from Russia. But then they had and were changed support against war. The thing was approved and in March 19th from General Iron Ramsey against the invasion. Hamilton and 62 of them April Saturday first commander. One church felt saying that their focus was putting on city into no Syria without major troops. Churchill ordered was done, so he never enjoyment. Hamilton's plan was to land the Greek force on the southern west of the Philippines and securing people and split north. The landing took place on April 22nd, and the beginning of everything around. The army's movements were inaccurate, but troops landed in the wrong place and reached for much narrower than expected. Worst of all, the troops fought back unexpected and previously unknown. At the end of the first day, most of the Allies settled down to make them landed, but they were unable to advance beyond beaches. In the Turks would fail, they were came down from several missiles and other stones that nuclear inhabitation and lasted. Also now, for the German Churchill enlisted only the same troops and heroes in the White Ukraine. He will land 3,000 men at sea a day. See 20 miles beneath. Zulu was a vulnerable target, and over the target, they had a large target. The terrain was low along and easy, and they were defended by only a handful of troops. The invasion here would force the troops to divide their forces, freeing up the Arab armies of the south. The storming would be broken and completed with them. To command the civil operation, Hamilton was forced to accept the most senior Englishmen available from that. The Lieutenant General Sir Philip Stafford. Under him, Major General Frederick Henry from the Legion 11 of the Division. Leader of his command was Hamilton's first choice. Stafford is 61 were military to their never met troops in North and Senate artillery bombardment at the end of the win. The battle. He recently reported Hamilton, for his part, had suffered another first on the previous year. Hamilton's style was to travel about to the paper with an including that be but legal to the and all the good about it. He was a gentleman, they were born unfortunate. In one of their first meetings during the Park requested chambers in Millennium thanks to this was Hamilton politely deferred to him. Hamilton did not have one. He did have one like that. Once the trip came over the land and see but they were virtually reinforcement and soon after line going short. Then Hamilton wanted them to eventually leading to the way to the Roman alien had to get to bed. They should get there before the chambers. Until the people of the island they dominate the commission. The order was simple but Hamilton is so as not to offend the subordinates expressed it in the milk-feeding chamber. It was crucial he was specified not to offend. He was sufficiently vague that far failed to bring him with such a verdict. Instead of finding he figured today, as soon as possible, thought that he should advance to the hill. Possibly, that was the order he gave Henderson. And as Henderson thinking about the movements about the whole campaign, transferred down to his training, the order between West Bergen and Vegas State. Although the federal difference of this outbreak, Hamilton overloading the team genuinely wanted to respect. He demanded equipping more artillery bombardments and introducing of the troops. Stauffer's troop rode out one by the troop that freedom 10-1. Hamilton replied more artillery was super with influence. The attack began in the early mornings of the August 2nd. Once again, much turned back. Stauffer's achievements and the landing plans made a mess. As his opponents chambers forward began to argue uncertain about the conditions and objectives. They sent messengers to ask their next steps. Advance, consolidate, Henderson had no answers. Stauffer had stayed on the board outfield in which to control the battlefield. But on the board it was impossible to reach quickly to get prompt orders from him. Hamilton was on an island built further away. The day was clear that they were in argument that illness and young had missed this. The next morning, Hamilton began to sense that something had gone very wrong. But when Thomas's Erica, he knew that the flatland and ground floor was essentially empty and north finger. The way to the was open, the troops had almost to emerge. The day was steady where they were. Hamilton decided to visit the front himself. Richard stopped at Broadway that afternoon. He found the generals in a self-congratulatory mood. All 20,000 men had gotten ashore. No, he had not yet ordered the troops to advance there without artillery. He was afraid of Chuck might counterattack. And he needed a day to consolidate and position and to mass back. Hamilton strained to control himself. He had heard an hour earlier that Turkish reinforcement had been still very towards Trigo. The Allies would have to secure to get to there. His evening, he said, the stopper was advanced on the march. Too dangerous. How much on the team was clear with politeness, speak yourself. And your panic Hamilton decided to visit him with Riyadh secret. Much to his disdain, he found the army launching on the people for their way of big holiday. He finally located him with he was at the far end of the building, basically supervising the building of his trooper headquarters. That's why he had noticed to take the hill. Hamilton replied he had sent several brigades for the purpose, but they had returned to trigger artillery and as criminals had told them they could not advance without more instructions. Communication between Hamilton, Stauffer, and Hamilton was being tilted forever. And when Stauffer had finally been removed, she had sent the message back to him for the complete posture. Restless men went to advance into the next day. Hamilton could not control himself no longer, and Hamilton assured her that he would go to a holding of an army of 20,000 American military and military mount. Tomorrow morning would be mature. The Turkish reinforcement were on the road. Although it was already known, Hamilton ordered him to fix a slant at the gate immediately to the people. It would be a race to the finish. Hamilton returned to the boat on the target the moment to monitor the situation. As soon as the next phone, he watched the back of the event. When software exploded, the Allied troops and headline retreat actually shifted. A large Turkish force had arrived to the prepared, but he managed to slow them. In the next 2 days, Turk plans to do their flats around for the range, limited army on adventure. Some 4 months later, the Allies built their attack on Lincoln and evacuated the troops. Repelling the invasion of Iran, Hamilton fought a very deep. He understood the need for supply to fuel the circle of the land itself. He naturally logistic agents of the contracts and figure this out. Locally, the key to Allies could work stability who crafted an excellent strategy to get that. He even tried to prepare for the period when expected contingency that could always happen in battle. But he ignored the one thing focused to the chain of command. And the circuit of communication that which ordered information and division of would and served the impact of government. He was dependent on that circuit to give him control of the situation and allow him to execute strategy. The first link in the channel from Miller was stopped for the enemy team. Both Neil was terrified and ripped and Hamilton further adapt his side to the weakness. His orders to refit the was civilizing enforcement. They stopped for Hamilton and separated it according to their faith. It's not ticket to pay as a possible goal aim for once the beef jokes were secured. The next morning in the tree where the pillows were to maybe is all into the bed. The day I moved onto my moment to my new life, armed with iron full of Stockford on the foot. Management was too overwhelmed to even. They themselves were terrified about being on their own and maybe messing up a plan they had never understood. But hesitated at every step. Below the criminals were offered below the criminals were offered and soldiers soon without literature left wandering on the beach like lost hands. Wagoners at the top trying to people in authority at the bottom. Success depended on the speed in which information could pass in both directions from the tree connect. But Hamilton could understand what was happening in the death patch of Supreme Island. The train was broken and either was lost. But a thing like this had been a golden opportunity such to for the connection with her thought. When you plan with company officers or both technology and broad intelligence, but that is to look at the world backwards. Nature more flavor, the truth that everything's left in itself. But the term your fatal to says it was your style of leadership and the genetic man that you design. And your order to invade and have fighted for the time they reached to feel they would be unions. Let people work, don't supervise, and they will revert to their natural selfishness. They will see in your order what they want to see, and they'll be willing to promote their own intent. Unless you adapt the leadership style for weaknesses of the people you will always certainly end up with a big immature command. Information on the bill will reach you to slaughter and proper chain of command of the Detroit basin is not an accident. It is your commission and great of art that requires constant attention and defense. The glory I but what the leaders are bad at the role they demand blood and greed. And the legal authority believed the general board so much. It's an enemy. It remains hard. Treats the notion to make the military point. Army had some few soldier, they were valid trade. Very vibrant air service on order technology. The less of time were not. In 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt had selected the American Army Chief of Staff. The approval was critical. World War II had begun in Europe, and Roosevelt believed that the United States was sure to get involved. He understood the weak military reforms and bypassed General with no seniority and experience in tough one for the job. The approval of the clear to the sky for the world approval was hopelessly dysfunctional. Many of the generals had monster egos. So the paladin reformed their way of doing things. Senior officers, instead of retiring, took jobs from the department and massive power base and put down what they did everything they could that they did everything they could to protect them. In place of people raised communication breakdowns and overlapping jobs, the department was a mess. How could Marshall revamp the army for global war if it could not control? How could he create order and efficiency? Some 10 years earlier, Marshall had served as an assistant commander of the infantry squad for Benning, Georgia, where he had trained many officers. Throughout his time there, he had kept a notebook in which he reported the most promising young man. Soon after becoming chief of staff, Marshall began to retire the older officers in the War Department and replaced them with the younger men who had personally trained. These officers were ambitious, yet well sure they desired to inform, and he encouraged them to speak their minds and show initiative. They included men like Omar Bradley and Mark Parker, who had been crucial in World War II, but no one was more impairing than the approach that Marshall proved the most genuine, Dwight D. Eisenhower. The relationship began a few days after their attack on Pearl Harbor, when Marshall and Eisenhower then the colonel to carry report on what should be done in the Far East. The report showed Marshall that Eisenhower showed his idea of how to run the war. For the next few months, he kept Eisenhower in the War Plans Division and watched him closely. The two men met every day and in that time, Eisenhower soaked up Marshall's style of leadership. His way of getting things done, Marshall tested Eisenhower's patience by indicating that he planned to keep him in Washington instead of giving him the field assignment that he desperately wanted. The colonel passed the test. Much like Marshall himself, he got along well with other officers, yet was quite thirsty. In July 1922, the Americans prepared to enter the war by fighting alongside the British in North Africa. Marshall surprised one and all by naming Eisenhower commander in the European Group of Operations. Eisenhower was by this time Lieutenant General, but was still relatively young. And in his first few months in the job at the American State Army in North Africa, the British put more for a replacement. But Marshall stood by his man, offering him advice and encouragement. One key suggestion was for Eisenhower to develop a protege, much as Marshall would have with him. A kind of warring deputy who thought the way he did and would act as a go-between with subordinates. Marshall's suggestion for the post was Major General Bradley, a man who knew well. Eisenhower accepted the idea, essentially duplicating the staff structure that Marshall had created in the War Department. With Bradley in place, Marshall left Eisenhower alone. Marshall positioned his proteges throughout the War Department where they quietly spread his way of doing things. To make the task easier, he cut the waste in the department with other reinforcements, reducing from 60 to 6 the number of deputies who reported to him. Marshall hated excess. His reports to Roosevelt are notable for his ability to summarize a complex situation in a few pages. The 6 men who reported to found that any report that lasted a page too long simply went unread. He would listen to the oral presentation with rapt attention, but the minute they wanted him to talk to say something not fact, he would look away bored, uninterested. There was an expression of dignity. Without saying a word, he had noted long that they had displeased him, and it was time for him to leave. Marshall's 6 deputies began to look like him and to demand from those who reported to them the efficiency and streamlined communication style he demanded of them. The speed of the information flowing up and down the line is now a big deal. Marshall exuded authority, but no one gathered no challenge from the country. He had an active communicating his wishes indirectly. But still, there was all the more reflected since England was out to think about what he meant. Brigadier General Leslie Albright, the military director of the project, to develop the atomic bomb. Once came to Marshall's office to get him to send up $100 million in expenditures. Finally, the chief of staff gave Wolf to table. He waited while Marshall diligently compared documents and made notes. Finally, Marshall put down his pen, examined the $100 million request, signed it, and returned it to the books without a word. The general thanked him and returned to me when Marshall Bowman spoke. It made interested to know what I was doing. I was writing the check for $3.52 for brass in my own. The thousands who worked under Marshall, whether in the War Department or abroad in the field, did not have to see him personally to feel his presence. They felt it in the church, but insightful reports that reached them to their deputies. In the spirit of responses to the questions and the questioning of the opponent's efficiency and free spirit, they felt it in the leadership style of a young like Eisenhower who had absorbed martial diplomatic yet worked with abilities. In a few short years, Marshall championed the railway program in the U.S. Army. He really understood how he had done it. When Marshall became chief of staff, he knew that he would have to evolve himself back. The temptation was to good conduct with everyone on every column area. They recalcitrance which were the political field and layers of waste. But Marshall was too smart to give in to that temptation. But there were too many battles to fight and they would exhaust him. He'd get frustrated, lose time, and probably give himself a heart attack. Second, by trying to micromanage the problem, he would become a drawer of pigment into a new side of the larger picture. But finally, he would come across as a whole. The only way to slay it would be when maybe hitting a monster, Marshall knew was to step back. He had a ruling the right to the others, controlling with such a light touch that no one would realize how thoroughly dominated. The key to Marcus' strategy was his selection, the union and placement of the intelligence. He metaphorically cloned himself in these men. He connected the sports over the phones on his lap, studying in time and moving in the pronouns and manipulated by his delegator. His cutting of voice was heavy-handed at first. But once he put his stunt on the department, he began to run it professionally on his own. He would people to deal with purely relevantly push the move, less waste of time on every level. It was streamlining achieved, Marshall could guide the machine with a light attack. The political types who were clogging the chain of command were either retired or joining the truth court meetings. His indirect style for unique putting in moves some of his stuff, but it was actually a highly effective way of asserting his authority. An officer might go home chuckling about only Marshall budget over a guardian bill, but it was slowly dawned on me that if he was to the penny, he bossed the month. That the War Department of Marshall will hear that today's war is complex and chaotic. But it's harder than ever to exercise control to the chain of command. You cannot supervise everything yourself. You cannot keep your eye on everyone. Being seen as a dictator would do you harm, but if you submit to complexity and let go of the chain of command, chaos will consume you. The solution is to deal with Marshall did, operate to the throne and remake control. Hire deputy to show your victory that can think on their own, acting as you would in the case. Instead of wasting time negotiating with every different person, work on spreading the spirit of camaraderie and efficiency that becomes self-policy. Streamlining the organization through cutting out waste and staffing the relevant reports and best in pointless meetings. The less attention is going to be letting you take the more time you have to larger picture. For asserting their authority generally and indirectly, people will follow you without being bullied. That's the achievement of result. Man is the exception of the individual, but the role of Now more than ever, effective leadership requires a depth and a set of touch. The reason I see them, we have grown new the structure of authority. At the same time, almost all of us imagine ourselves as authorities in our own right. Officers weren't the soldier. Feeling the need to assert themselves, people to put their own interest before the team. The group unity is fragile and can reasonably track. These trends affect English in ways they barely know. The tendency to give more power to the group also assume democratic. Leaders pulled up pushback for opinion. That the group make decisions give subordinates influence to the country of an overall strategy. Without realizing that these leaders are letting the politics of the basic influence of violating one of the monthly 30 years of warfare. Membership. Minutes of the community. Before it's too late, run the instance of war, divide leadership with the recipe for the after. The conflict of the greatest military in history. Among the most heavily produced was the Battle of Circuit River. In 260 BC, the two Romans and the Carthaginians held by Hannibal. The Romans outnumbered the Carthaginians 2-1 but were virtually annihilated with 50 executed strategic embellishment. Hannibal, of course, was a military genius, but they all won in escaping much of the blame for their own defeat. They had a false command system with 2 ideas sharing leadership of the army. They didn't know how to fight him, or at least they fought each other as much as they fought him. And they made a mess of things. Nearly 2,000 years later, a bitter debate through the pressure on the leaders of its army all fight and all lasted to fight great powers relying against him in the Southern Day of war. Partly because he made decisions so much faster than the alliance general, who had to consult each other in every move they made. In World War II, General Marshall was well aware of the danger of divided leadership and insisted that one supreme commander should lead the Allied armies. What is victory in this battle? Eisenhower could not have succeeded in Europe. In the Vietnam War, the unity and command drove the Navy villains didn't well being again. It gave them a tremendous advantage over the Americans who thought he was crafted by a crowd of soldiers and generals. Divided leadership is dangerous because people in groups often think and act in ways that are illogical and effective. Solid groupthink. People in groups are chaotic. They say big things that they think will help their improvement within the group. They aim to please others to promote themselves, rather than see things dispassionately. Where an individual can be bold and creative is developing a fatal risk. You need to find a company as among all different evils to creativity. The group has a mind of its own and that mind is cautious, slow to decide, only mindfulness and sometimes downright irrational. This is the game you must play. Do whatever you can to preserve dignity in the command. Shoot the strings to be pulled in your helm. The large and strategic mission must be completely move along. At the same time, hide your tracks. Go behind the scene, make the big short involved in your individuals. Seek their advice and incorporate the good ideas, colliding with other the battles. If necessary, make minor cosmetic strategy changes to stage spirit unsecure politically. Animals in the group. But ultimately, trust your own conviction. Remember the danger of iron. Group decision. The first rule of effective leadership is never to lead the leaders in the command. Control is an elusive phenomenon. Often the harder you tell that the people, the less control you have over them. Leadership of more than just barking out order. It takes several. I think it's clearly the great Swedish film director Ingrid Bergman was often overwhelmed with this vision. He had visions of the things he wanted to make, but the work of being a director was so taxing and the perfect so immense But he made lash out at his classic book, shouting out orders and attacking the thing, not giving him what he wanted. Some was still within the same Ben had his dictatorial ways, others became repeating the television. But almost every new film, Bergman would have to start again with a new path and could. They're trying to make things work. But eventually he put together a team of the finest cinema blackwood. Better in art that I could relate to stating, people were sure that Stride's stories are really twisted. That let him lose the ways of command, what actors like Nate Vaughn he could just suggest what he had in mind. Then watches the great acting brought him ideas right. Greater control from Matt Cope and letting go. The critical step in creating an effective chain of command was a singly skilled team that showed the growth in obvious. That team gave the manual them a great story that motivated people who didn't think on their own. The name as a delegator, a player and very kind of leader, and the city in the invaluable energy which routinely direct for the larger picture. In creating this team, you are looking for people who know that they're unique, that create deficiencies. Where the skills you lack, in the American Civil War, Lincoln Lincoln had strategy for defeating himself. But he had no military background and was disdained by his general. Lincoln was a strategy who could not realize it. But Lincoln soon found his teammate in General Ulysses S. Grant, who surely believed in the prison war film and did not have an oversight either. Once Lincoln discovered Grant, who matched the team, put him in command and let him run the war as a self-help. Be careful in associating with this team that you are not seduced by attributes and its virtue. Character, the ability to work under you and with the rest of the team, and the capacity to accept responsibility and figure independently or weaken team. Benefit Marshall tested Eisenhower saying, we may not have as much time as good, but never choose a man merely by his literary resume. Look beyond his story to his psychological makeup. Rely on the team you have ascended, but do not leave this prisoner or give it undue influence. Nothing people everywhere had his inkling in great place. The advisors and cabinet members on whom he depended on for their ideas and opinions. But he never let them know the actual decision making, and he kept them from building up their own power base within the administration. He saw their simply as tools, extending his own ability to solve the value of time. Even if the unity of command was never seduced into violating it. The chief function of any chain of command is to supply information rapidly from the trenches. They didn't adapt fast to circumstances. The shorter and more streamlined the chain of command are better for the flow of information. Even so, information is often the motor as the planning of the chain. But telling itself that reveals some of people's standard life in general of their future through fingertip. Some of the truths will interpret the information for me, filtering what you hear. To get more direct knowledge, you might occasionally want to regulate for yourself. Marshall was sometimes walked in on his baseline view and see what it realized. How it reports to the effect. He'd also read other things over there, but in these days of implicit replacement, this to be seemed far too much of a turn. What we needed would be more trade authority marketing on or club or direct television. People vary the patch of the chain and ask for the duty and the instant information from validate. These people in the female world of plans and allies and don't even bypass the slowing and should. The master of the day was reported who created a kind of shadow would go to younger outfit in all areas of the military. Men chosen for the loyalty, energy, and intelligence. At the moment's notice, he was sent one of these men to a far or garrison and even the enemy left the stuff at a diplomatic angle. The secret instruction to gather the kind of information he could not get fast enough to the normal channel. In general, it is important to flexibly display telescopes on pretty things throughout the year. We give you flexibility in the chain need to maneuver in a generally rigid environment. A single bladed list for children from there comes from the political elements in the book. People like this were misdelivered, they spring up like music in any organization. Not only are they out for themselves, but they built factions to further their own agendas and fracture the cohesion they have built. They took friction with commands for their own purpose of handing loopholes and any ambiguity. They created visible breaks in the chain. How do we know before they arrive? In hiring the team, look at the candidate system. How they rest of. They often lose because and this is a sign of the kind of ambition that would keep them from fitting in. When people seem to share your ideas and react with be worried, they are probably mirroring the tone. The perfect human Elizabeth I of England was full of political science. And Elizabeth's solution was to keep her opinions quiet on any issue, no outsiders. No one outside her inner circle knew what she stood. That made it hard for people to mirror her. To disguise and pretended to kind of full perfect agreement. Verticals are a wise strategy. Another solution is to isolate the political myth, to give them alone those familiar with the organization. Marshall accomplished this by infusing the group with a spirit of efficiency. The records of that spirit stood out and could quickly be isolated. In any event, do not be naive. Once you identify the most in your group, you must act fast to stop them. In building a power base from which to ensure your authority. Finally, pay attention to the orders themselves. Their form, their form as well as their sections. They build their workers, and they pass from person to person. They are hopelessly altering. Their step comes to see and symbolizing uncertainty and indecision. It is critical that yourself be clear about what you want before instilling your order. On the other hand, you're looking at too specifically too narrow. You will encourage people to be held like a channel to be stopping for themselves, which they must be when the situation requires it. Veering in the direction of an art. Here isn't so much as Napoleon was the master. His orders were full of juicy details which didn't pay off with the truth for how his mind worked, while also allowing them to interpret the leeway. He would often spell out possible contingencies, adjusting which the authors could adapt into situations if necessary. Most important, he made his orders inspiring. His language communicated the spirit of his desires. The beautifully worded order has extra power. Instead of feeling like a minion there only to execute the wishes of the distant emperor, the recipient becomes a participant in the great cause. Bland and bureaucratic orders broken down into listless activities and precise execution. Clear, concise, inspiring orders make all officers feel the control and full true work by the spirit. No good can ever come of divided leadership. If you are ever awkward in position in which you will have to show command, turn it down, or the enterprise will fail and you will be held responsible. Better to take a lower position and let the other person have the job. It is always wise, however, to take advantage of your opponent's faulty command structure. Never be intimidated by an alliance or forces against it. If they share leadership, if they are ruled by committee, their advantage is more than enough. In fact, you do what Napoleon did and seek the enemy with action of command structure. You cannot fail to win. Hey. Segment your sources, the control trust line. The critical elements in war are speed and adaptability. The ability to move and make yourself dispatches from the enemy. The speed and adaptability are harder to choose today. We have more information than ever before, however, with significant interpretation and decision making more difficult. We have more people to manage, those people are more widespread and we face more uncertainty. Learn from Napoleon, warfare's greatest masters. Speed and adaptability come from the flexible organization. A breaker force of independent groups that can operate and make discipline on their own. Make your furnace elusive and unstoppable by infusing them with the spirit of the campaign, and giving them a mission to accomplish it, and then letting them in. Again, calculated disorder. And it's remembered that defeating Austria in the Battle of Marengo, Napoleon gave the Federal over to Italy and forced the Austrians to sign a treaty recognizing French territorial gains there and in Belgium. For the next 5 years, none of these peace had spoken. But Napoleon incredibly so, found himself the Emperor of France and many in Europe, began to suspect that this point upstart had limitless ambitions. Karl Marx, the Austrian quartermaster general and an older and influential member of the Austrian military, advocated a preemptive strike against France. But an army large enough to guarantee victory, he told his colleagues the more the object is to beat the enemy, not made to the world being beaten. Knight and like-minded authors slowly gained influence, and in April 1805, Austria, England, and Russia formed a treaty of alliance to wage war on France, and force her to return to a free and Napoleonic order. That summer, they formulated a plan. 95,000 Austrian troops would attack the French northern Italy, aggressively humiliating the Queen of 1800. Another 23,000 troops would secure the Tyrol between Italy and Austria. Macro then lead reports of 7,000 men west and along the Danube into Bavaria, preventing this strategically located country from alignments of the France. Once encamped in Bavaria, Mac and the army would avoid the rebel a few weeks later of 75,000 troops from Russia. The two armies were linked up, and this unstoppable force would march west into France. Meanwhile, the English would attack the French at sea. More troops would later be forwarded to each production and nuclear for an army totaling 500,000 men overall. The largest military force ever assembled in Europe up to that point. Not even Napoleon could have withstood an army more than twice the size of their own, moving in on him from all sides. In the middle of September, Mack began his phase of the campaign by advancing along the Danube to Ulm. In the heart of Bavaria, having established his camp there, he felt hugely satisfied. Mack loaded this order and uncertainty. He tried to think of everything in advance to come up with a clear plan and make sure everyone stuck to it. Clockwork warfare, he called it. Without his plan was perfect, much to go on, Napoleon was doomed. Mack had once been captured and forced to spend 3 years in France where he had studied Napoleon-style war. The key Napoleonic strategy was to make the enemy divide his forces. But now the trick was reversed. The trouble in Italy, Napoleon could not afford to send more than 70,000 French troops across the Rhine into Germany and Bavaria. The moment he crossed the Rhine, the Austrians would know his intentions and would act to throw his mark. His army would need at least 2 months to reach Ulm and Danube. By then, the Austrians would already have linked up with the Russians and spoke through outlets in France. The strategy was as close to Frankfurt as Mack had ever imagined. He savored the role he would play in destroying Napoleon, for he hated the man and all he represented, undisciplined soldiers with financial revolution throughout Europe. The constant threat to the status quo. For Mack, the Russians were not arriving only to see. Near the end of September, however, Mack began to sense things wrong. To the west of Ulm lay the Black Forest, between his own position and the French border. Suddenly, scouts were telling him that a French army was passing through the forest in his direction. Mack was bewildered and knew the best things from Napoleon to cross the Rhine into Germany and fade to the north, where his passage east would be smoother and better stopped. But now he was yet again doing the unexpected, funneling an army through a narrow opening in the Black Forest and sending it straight at Mack. Even if this move was just a bait, Mack had to defend the position, so he sent part of his army west into the Black Forest, stealing the French advancing long enough for the Russians to come to his aid. A few days later, Mack began to feel overly confused. The French were proceeding to the Black Forest, but some of the cavalry had gone quite far. At the same time, though, word reached Mack of a large French army somewhere to the north of his position. The reports were contradictory. Some said this army was as bigger, 60 miles north of ago. Others had it more to the east or even further to the north or quite far field of Daniel. Mack could get no hard information since the French cavalry had a confident Black Forest broad access to the north for reconnaissance. The Austrian general now faced the Leopold Morris, uncertainty, and it was clouding his ability to push through. Finally, he ordered all of his troops back to where he would concentrate his forces. Perhaps he fully intended to do battle at home. At least Mack would have the numbers. In early October, Austrian scouts were at last able to find out what was really going on, and it was a nightmare. The French army had crossed the Danube to the east of Ulm, blocking Mack's way back to Austria and cutting off the Russians. Another army lay to the south, blocking the route to Italy. How could 70,000 French soldiers appear in so many places at once and move so fast? Gripped by panic, Mack sent forces in every direction. On October 11, his men discovered a victory. Only a small French force far buried in way more things. There he could push through and escape the French encirclement. He began to prepare for the march, but 2 days later, when he was on the point of ordering the retreat, his scouts reported that a large French force had appeared overnight, blocking the northeastern route as well. On October 20, finding out that the Russians had decided not to go to the rescue, Mack surrendered. Over 60,000 Austrian soldiers were taken prisoners with hardly a shot fired. It was one of the most splendidly bloodless victories in history. In the next few months, Napoleon's army turned east to deal with the Russians and remaining Austrians, fingering in a spectacular victory at Auschwitz. Meanwhile, Mack languished in an Austrian prison, sentenced to 10 years for a role in this humiliating defeat. There he racked in flames, losing his sanity in the process and said, "Where had his plan gone wrong? How had an army appeared out of nowhere to his injury, so easily swallowing him? He had never seen anything like it, and he was trying to figure it out to the end of the days." History should not judge General Mack Twain partially for the French armies he faced in the fall of 1805, representing one of the greatest revolutions of military history. For thousands of years, war had been fought in essentially the same way. The commander led his large and unified army into battle, basing upon their roughly precise. He would never break up his army into smaller units, for that would violate the military principle, particularly ones for exclusive training. But furthermore, scattering his forces would make Rome harder to monitor, and he would lose control over the battle. Suddenly, a funny change though that in the year of peace between 1800 and 1805, he reorganized the French military, bringing different forces together to form the Grand Army, 210 men strong. He divided this army into several corps, each with its own cavalry, infantry, artillery, and general staff. Each was led by a martial general, usually a young officer who had strength with previous campaigns. Varying in size from 15,000 to 30,000 men, each force with a miniature army headed by a miniature Napoleon. The key to the system was the speed with which the troops stood in. Napoleon would give the marchers their mission, then let them accomplish it on their own. Little time was wasted by the passing of order back and forth, for smaller armies needing less baggage could march with greater speed. Instead of a single army moving in a straight line, Napoleon could disperse and concentrate his corps in numerous patterns, which the enemy seemed chaotic and unleadable. This was the monster that Napoleon unleashed on Europe in September 1805. While a few troops were dispatched to northern Italy as a holding fort against Austria's French invasion there, 7 French moved east into Germany within a scattered array. A reserve force with much cavalry was sent through the Black Forest, drawing Ney to the west, and so making it harder for him to understand what was happening to the north and easier to attack. Napoleon understood Ney's simple psychology and how the appearance of disorder would paralyze him. Meanwhile, was still at a frigate, the 7th Fleet wheeled south to the Danube and cut off Ney's greatest scale. One fourth marshal hearing that the North be pretty loud from deeply held and not working Napoleon to send orders by simply spread and covered it on his own. Wherever Mac went, he would hit a corps large enough to hold him until the rest of the French army could tight in the circuit, or like a pack of coyotes against a rabbit. Understand, the future belongs to the group that are fluid, fast, and non-linear. Their natural tendency as a leader made groups who want to control the group, to coordinate its every movement, but that would just tie you into the past or into the slow-moving army's destiny. It takes strength to carry to allow for a marginal chaos to be served, to let go or to let go a little. But by decentralizing your army and segmenting it into teams, you don't gain in mobility or you lose a complete control. When mobility is the greatest push multiplier of the law, it allows you to both disperse and concentrate your army, throwing it into patterns instead of advancing in straight line. And these patterns will confuse and paralyze your opponents, giving you different corps of missions that fit your strategic goals, then let them accomplish them as they see fit. Smaller teams are faster, more creative, more adaptive, their options with the are more engaged, more motivated in the end through fluidity and bringing you far more power to control than fitting domination.